these two programs as currently envisioned are extremely inequitable across the state. So what's the impact of any new formula? Much more simple. You could actually explain to the community why a district is getting the amount of money it's getting. That would be pretty challenging today with 60 different categorical programs. It's rational. Similar districts with similar student populations would receive similar amounts of money. Today, that's really not the case. And as the governor envisions it, and I think as both houses do, provides a lot more flexibility to districts to determine how they can best use their resources to meet their local needs. A couple other things. The governor's proposal holds all districts harmless. However, that's from their funding levels today. Under the Assembly's plan, which I'll speak to in just a minute, districts are held harmless to their economic recovery target, so that under that scenario, a district who might not see who would see no gain under the governor's proposal would actually see restoration of some of the cuts to their revenue limit and categorical programs that they had received in the past few years, whereas under the governor's proposal, a district who was already at their LCFF target would not be growing. And then just lastly, under any of these proposals, almost all districts, not those that are already at their target, but almost all districts would receive significantly more funding, about $3,500 per pupil on average, at least under the governor's proposal. So, and the Assembly has proposed higher base rates, and as a result, that would be even more under the Assembly's proposal. Yes?
You're saying eventually?
No, not in the current year, over the course of implementation, so by 2019, 2020.
But when you say would receive significantly more funding than we have today.
Correct.
Not than the previous, not than the current funding system.
That's correct, but even if you were to compare, if you were to say,
I just want to make sure I.
yeah, no, that's accurate, but if you were to say I want to restore all of the cuts to the revenue limits, and I want to restore foregone cost of living adjustments, and I want to restore categorical programs, most districts would receive more money under the local control funding formula. Under the Assembly's scenario, all districts would receive more money, not only because of the restoration, but also future growth that they would receive. Okay, oh good, we're at the scenarios. Okay, so these scenarios, scenarios 1 and 2 are what would things look like if we had all the money we wanted to implement a new system. You can see scenario 1 and 2 do parallel what the Assembly adopted today in terms of its overall guidelines for a new system. There are a few sort of technical details which I'm happy to talk about as a sidebar if people want to go into them, but generally the rates that you see displayed here would potentially be the same as what the Assembly has adopted. That said, this package of principles does not have specific rates in it, but if we were to assume these rates, these are sort of the kinds of outcomes you would see. So scenario 1 assumes an average base rate of about $9,700. That would equate to a state-weighted average rate of $12,300 per pupil. That's inclusive of the first supplement and the concentration factor. Under this scenario, the supplement would be set at 25%. Districts with concentrations of English learners and low-income students above 75% would be eligible. Now keep in mind, while it's a higher threshold in terms of concentration, it's a duplicated count. So far more districts would be eligible than would be under an unduplicated count. In fact, only a very small percentage of districts wouldn't receive any concentration funding under this scenario. It is only about 15% of statewide ADA, and it's some very small districts. If we had all the money we wanted to implement this system, it would cost about $73 billion. And then scenario 1 deficited is the same assumptions, but what if we just deficited everyone down in order to get within the cost of the governor? So if we were to assume the same revenue trajectory as the governor, where could we expect to be under this scenario in 2019-20? And you can see there the same, just the average base rates are adjusted and the weighted pupil average is a little bit different. You can see the average base rate is higher, the weighted average is a little bit lower. That's partially because there are a few programs taken out of the formula under the assembly scenario, like adult education and regional occupational centers and some other programs that are important to the assembly that they wanted to fund separately. So those monies are not reflected in that $10,300 figure. Scenario 2 is very similar to scenario 1. The really only difference is that the concentration threshold is calculated at a school site level rather than a district level. As a result, you can see it costs a bit more. It also has 1 or 2 other categorical programs removed from it, so that sort of, while it takes some money away from what you see as the weighted average rate, districts would be receiving that over and above for that particular purpose, for those particular activities. Are there any questions about these scenarios? Yeah?
I thought that with the governor's revise, that the concentration supplement was like 17.5% and that it was going to be a sliding scale, so that if you were at 49%, it would be not as much of a difference if you were over 50% and at 50 or 51.
Yeah, so the language in the governor's May revise was very confusing, and that is exactly, that's how I thought it worked when I read the language. It's actually saying that, what the language is saying is that if you have a concentration of 100% in your district, you will see a 17.5% add-on for the concentration for every student. So they're trying to sort of explain what happens on a district-wide basis based on your concentration. And so it's not actually a change from January. He keeps it the same. He just describes the effect per pupil, per all pupils in a district, in a different way. So he says, okay, you district, you're at 55% concentration. That means 5% of your kids are eligible for the concentration factor. Let's say, for simplicity, that equates to $10,000. We'll now spread that $10,000 across all your students and call that a 2% bump to all students instead of just applying the concentration factor to 5% of the students. Is that, yeah, so I had the same, I ran into my coworker's office, I was like, they changed it, it's a sliding scale, this is great, and no, so, anyway, yeah, he kept it, really the structure between January and May of the governor's proposal remained the same. There were a few technical changes in terms of calculating who was eligible, but that was really it. Are there any other questions on this slide?
Can you talk about who is eligible, how that's decided?
Oh, yeah, sure. So, under the governor's proposal, a low-income student is defined as a student that is eligible for free and reduced price meals. So that is any student whose family's income is within 185% of the federal poverty line. That equates to about $40,000 for a family of 4. So any student whose family's income falls below that threshold qualifies. The governor also identifies foster youth as eligible for the supplement. However, because he uses an unduplicated count, and because all foster youth are by nature of being a foster youth eligible for free and reduced price meals, they don't actually add any counts, so we don't reference them when we talk about the supplement since they're included in the low-income student calculation. English learners under the governor's proposal are any student designated as an English learner. That said, he does cap eligibility at 7 years, so once a student is an English learner for an 8th year, that student would no longer be eligible for a supplement. However, if the student is low income, then the student remains eligible based on that characteristic. So it's only for those students who are English learners only that this time limit really has an effect. In January, the governor had capped it at 5 years, but he received a fair amount of criticism for that cap and has moved it to 7.
I'm in a little bit of trouble with the math here. So your weighted average column